All right. All right. All right. So thank you for doing that. It was awesome to see where you all are coming from. Um, so I want to first introduce myself. I am Emiliana. I go by Emmy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally from Valparaiso, a town, a city town in Chile. I did United World College in Singapore, and I graduated in 2018. And after that, I joined the Global Citizen Year Fellowship in India in 2019. And I also did the academy during the spring 2021, which was an awesome experience. So a few housekeeping things. First of all, the speaker, Chido, will be with us for 1 hour, and then we'll transition to a 30-minute discussion, which will be focused in this with the students. So staff and speaker will be asked to leave, but we will have a great discussion with the students. If you have any questions, please use the Slido link in the chat and make sure to attach your name to the question, or otherwise we won't be able to ask it. And also, like, we will try to get to all of your questions, but that might also be challenging, so we will pick some of them. Just important to be aware of that. Once we pick your question, if you are elected, just raise your hand, turn off your camera if possible, so we can bring you onto the screen. Try to use the emojis or the reactions if you're feeling excited, or if you want to express how you're feeling throughout the conversation. And add the place where you're joining from to display next to your name. So for example, you can see next to my name, I have written Chile, and that's the place where I'm coming from. We also strongly encourage you all to turn on your camera if possible during this conversation. After, as I mentioned before, after Chido leaves, we will have a small discussion, but also a small survey, and there will be some news on that later on. Right, so before we dive in, I just want to share some quick context about Global Citizen Year and why we're so delighted to have you join us today. Global Citizen Year is a nonprofit forging a new educational path to launch the leaders of the world that are required now. I had the chance to be a Global Citizen Year Fellow in India from 2018 to 2019, and also an academy student during the spring in 2020. And now I'm one of the more of the 1,000 alumni around the world. With the pandemic, Global Citizen Year created the Academy, which is a virtual program that operates around the same pillars of leadership as a fellowship program. This program provides students ages 17 to 21 with an incredible leadership as a practice curriculum. A global community of students from over 50 countries, mentors from various disciplines and backgrounds, and this Leadership in Action speaker series that I'm delighted to have you join us today. So I hope you're getting more excited about this conversation, because we are getting closer to introduce Chido. So Chido Govera is a mushroom farmer, a food activist, a business entrepreneur, foster mother to more than a dozen girls. Chido Govera is a kitchen visionary in Zimbabwe, a pioneer in the cultivation of mushrooms throughout Africa and the world. Chido is a Shona name that means passion. Her life is full of meaningful stories of change. Chido was an orphan at 7 when her mother died of AIDS. As a girl facing the struggles of food security at age 11, she had the unique opportunity to learn about food and mushrooms. Mushroom farming enabled her to feed those.
You're on mute, Emmy.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Can you give me a glimpse of where did you miss me?
You were only out for a couple seconds, so you can just keep going.
Okay. So Chido, as a girl facing the struggles of food security at age 11, she had the unique opportunity to learn about food and mushrooms. Mushroom farming enabled her to feed those dearest to her. Mushroom gave her the chance to help other orphans who live close by. She was fortunate to have good mentors who helped her perfect the art and science of farming mushrooms. Some people look at a mushroom and see a mushroom. Chido looked at a mushroom and saw a weapon of social change. A path out of anger and poverty to empowerment and income for herself and other orphan girls. Over the years, as a young professional, she reached out to over 1,000 women in communities in Zimbabwe, Congo, Ghana, Cameroon, Tanzania, and South Africa. Her work has reached schools and communities in India, Aboriginals in Australia, and entrepreneurs in the US and around Europe. Wow, how exciting this is gonna be. Thank you for joining us today, Chido. So my first question is about your biography. I usually like to start with a little exercise. Often, like I just did, we kind of project these huge biographies on people, but we actually wanna know how your journey as a leader has been like. And so I'm wondering how you might expand the introduction I just gave you to include the parts of you and your journey that are important to you, but that people don't always get to know about you through the bios that you're introduced by.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I usually like to introduce myself by telling the meaning of my name. I'm called Chido. And yes, Chido is a Shona name that means passion. And I think passion has been the major driving force in the journey of my life until today. Yes, apart from growing up as an orphan, I also grew up with a dear grandmother who was over 100 years old. And I think my grandmother was my biggest inspiration in my life. Not only did she lighten all the burdens of my childhood by just being there, but she also brought a lot of laughter. And I think she taught me the basics of hope. So I always say that I am my grandmother's child. And from her, I've learned a lot. And I think this marks the beginning of my journey as a leader.
Beautiful. Just wondering, what was the name of your grandmother?
My grandmother's name was called Mildred, or Nakei. Nakei was a Shona name that she was given. I actually don't think it had any special meaning. But she went by the name Nakei and Mildred. Mm-hmm. And she used seeing a lot.
Thank you for sharing that. So the second question will be, most of our students at the academy are about 17 to 21 years old. So I would like to start there in terms of your journey. Can you paint a picture for us of your life around that age and what was going through your mind at that time?
When I was between 17 and 21, first of all, I just gotten a chance to go back to school. The last time I'd been in school was when I was 9 years old. And I'd only done 5 years of primary level education. When I was 16, I went back to school and I immediately went to secondary school because I was too old to go back to primary school. So at 17, I was actually just in the second year of secondary school. And my mind was set on the belief that I'd been working, but then I grew up in a community where a lot of people had not gone to school. And a lot of people were just still struggling to find themselves. So I wanted to be able to learn the basics, to be able to talk with you now, but also to be able to make my work bigger. I already knew about mushrooms. I already knew exactly what I wanted to do with the mushrooms, but I also realized that I lived in a world that was so focused around this conventional education and that I had to go back there and get it. So I was in the second year of secondary school, and at 21, I just finished, and I finished when I was 20, and we had a big discussion about, okay, you just finished your matric, what are you going to do? I'd worked at the university and I had some professors coming to me and saying, oh, since we saw you, we watched you grow. I was at the university since I was 12. They say, we watched you grow and now you've gotten your matric. Why don't you go on to the next 2 years of secondary school and then you can come to university here? And at that time, I remember giving a very clear answer where I said, I spent already now the past 4 years walking up and down to school. Yes, I've learned to read and write. But the thing is, I already know what I really want to do. And I want to be doing that. And so I prefer to learn the lessons that I want to learn going forward, doing the work that I love to do, which I am now able to communicate. And I think it was exactly when I was around 2021 that I went to Colombia for the first time. And I went to Colombia because one of my mentors, Carmen Jaramillo, who farms mushrooms as well still today, had offered to spend some months teaching me. And my adopted father, who I met thanks to the mushrooms, had a good relationship with that. And he was very supportive of my decision to say, I don't want school anymore. At 9, I stopped school because I had no money to pay for school. I had to concentrate full time on putting food on the table. And at 20, I was saying no school because I knew I was able to learn outside of school, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the knowledge that I had. So 17 to 21, I actually made the biggest decision of my life, next to denying to get married off when I was 10.
Wow, that's really inspiring. It's nice to hear that at this period of your life you were actually making really important decisions, because sometimes we underestimate that, but I think you bring a different perspective. So you mentioned a few things, and I'm really curious. The first question that I have for you after what you have shared with us is, how did your idea of growing mushrooms to feed your community come to life? You mentioned that you already knew that you wanted to work with mushrooms, but I was wondering, how did this start?
So I guess to understand that, I have to take you back to my life in the village as a young girl. So at 7 years, I became an orphan. At the age of 9, I was out of school. And then at 10, there were people in my community, and in this case, it was specifically a cousin sister of mine, who came to me and said, Chido, we see you're struggling. You are struggling to get food. You're struggling to do all that it takes to run a household as a child. And we want to help you. But the only way we can help you is that you marry a friend of my husband. This is my cousin sister saying. And I was 10. The friend of the husband was 30 years older than me. He was 40. And at the time, when I was 10, to see that this was my only way out of this situation, it was one of those moments where you're thinking, do you want to have food on your table now? Or are you dreaming of something more? And I think this also ties back to the story I told in the beginning of how my grandmother was always a central part of my life, but also really the emergence of hope in my life in the fact that when I had this offer to get married, the first question that I wanted to figure out was that if I get married so I have food on my plate, what happens to the people that I take care of? Because I'd really made it my life mission to take care of my grandmother, who was over 100 years old. And I also had a little brother who was 2 years younger than me. So I answered the questions one by one. First, I thought, well, if I get married, I could go with my brother. And then I'm like, so, but if I go with my brother, what happens to my grandmother? My grandmother, again, was not just someone I took care of, but it was somebody who took care of me in ways that many people could not. Yes, she could not bring food on the table. She could not do and go and do the work that I had to be forced to do as a child. But she was this foundation. She was, this place where I could feel grounded. And to think, well, I mean, she was also too old. I couldn't say, oh, I take my grandmother with me. Who goes to get married and take their brother and their grandmother with them? And so I decided, you know what? My grandmother is here and she has a homestead, and I can't take me with her to go and get married, but I also just can't leave her to go and get married, because then it defeats the whole purpose. And I'm going to be out there all by myself. My grandmother defended me. My grandmother brought the laughter that I didn't get easily. So I chose to not go and to stay. Because I stayed and because I was an orphan, there were programs in my community that kept track of young orphans in the community, so that when there was any help, we would be on a list of people who received that help. And so when I stopped going to school, I was very passionate about school, and I was good in school, and I really wanted to make something of myself, but I had a situation at hand that forced me to stop. So there came a message through this network of women in my community who were responsible of keeping this register of children in need of help and care, of old people, disabled people in the community, and they were responsible for channeling help to these people. So they received a message from Africa University through the United Methodist Church, because Africa University is a United Methodist supported university. And the message came through this church to say, we at Africa University have been learning about mushroom farming, and we think that the knowledge we have today is not only for academia. We want to bring this knowledge to the people who need it. And so they set out to train young girl orphans. And I was one of 15 young girl orphans who went and attended that training. One thing also I learned at that time, to go back to the importance of grandmothers, even for different situations. When the lady from the church came to tell the story, she had to ask to my uncle. And my uncle would give permission, yes or no, for me to go to this training. And this woman stepped in and said, my uncle's name was Christopher. Uncle Christopher, please allow us to go with Chido. And because I'm a girl, he was worried that if I leave the homestead, just living without getting married, then he would get nothing out of me. If I leave to go to get married, he would get money because there will be a bride price paid, and that gives him money. So if I leave in the name of going to get training and I don't come back, he loses his money. So he wanted some kind of guarantee. And this woman in the community was some kind of leader that for me, even up till today, I still look up to. She came, she sat down with my uncle. She says, look, I'm a woman in this village. I have my homestead in this village. And when this training is happening, I am going with Chido. And when I come back with Chido. I will definitely come back to my homestead. And if I come without her, you will come and confront me about it. So she was able to give that guarantee. And so my uncle says, okay, fine, she can go. So I went to 1 week of training at Africa University. I was barefoot and I had my clothes in a shopping bag, a plastic bag from OK. I went with Loveness. That was the name of the woman who gave a guarantee for me to leave the village so I can go and get my training. And there was a lot to experience being in a university, coming from a village, and the setup that is a university, the setup that is the training facility where we were was just so impressive for a girl my age. But for me, what was more was that I learned to do something that enabled me to put food on the table without so much the hassle that I had had to endure. After 1 week, we came back to the village. We started growing mushrooms. The first mushrooms we cooked for our local community to taste. And the days that followed, there was high demand for mushrooms and there was money in my pocket. And with that money, I went, and I remember the first day when I went into a shop and bought myself a new piece of clothing. It was a skirt and a blouse. But with the rest of the money that we didn't use for our own upkeep, we were able to contribute that money to the group of women that took care of other orphans in the community. And with that was for me the moment where I realized I just stepped on something, because not only was there money in my pocket and food on my plate, mushroom production was based on agro waste. This is the corn stalks that I had at the end of each farming season in my fields, but not food. The corn cobs, the millet stalks, the chaff. And realizing this made me think at that young age of 11, I want to learn to simplify mushroom farming, not just so that I can grow mushrooms and pay school fees for other young orphans, but so I can teach them as well. So that maybe some of them who may be not so academically talented, or who may be rebels like myself, who say, I don't want to keep going to school, but I want to go there and get my hands dirty and do something different and make a difference, not just in my life, but in the lives of others. And that this is actually how I discovered mushrooms. And fast forward, at 12, I went to the university and I spent 3.5 years working, farming mushrooms at the university and learning all the science behind making and starting mushroom farming until I went back to school when I was 17.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's awesome to hear your story. Before we continue, I just want to remind everyone that you can submit your questions to the Slido channel. So yes, by clicking there and writing your questions and your name, we'll be able to ask your questions to Chido. So yeah, so after hearing you, I am aware that in 2013 you founded the Future of Hope, which is an organization headquartered in Zimbabwe. The Future of Hope facilitates research and training in innovative initiatives that provides for and promotes sustainable food, nutrition, and income security to improve the conditions necessary for every member of society to reach their full potential. I'm curious to hear from you, what is the Future of Hope, and what is vision? Also, like, what's your hope for the future, if we can play around with words?
Yeah. So the Future of Hope is actually named after a little book I wrote where I was writing the story of my life as a way of actually getting to a place of healing. I had experienced a lot of things in my life, a lot of them very hurtful, a lot of them that I needed to work through. And the way I worked through that was to write this little book. And the title of that book was The Future of Hope. I wrote that when I was 19, 20. And I was looking back and thinking, yes, I've written the book and now I'm where I am. But what is hope for me? And hope for me was not something that I could just answer with a definition. And so I decided to create an organization that resembled hope for me. And this is actually how the Future of Hope came to be, where hope for me was to be able to learn. Hope for me was to be able to provide for the basics of life, the basic things that I need to be able to feel safe, that I need to be able to concentrate on learning, and to be able to protect those I need to protect. But to do that, I need an entity that can help facilitating that, and to create that environment, an environment where you can learn and to start to believe in yourself and to start to see beyond the problems that you are in now. And I remember my first writing was, as the Future of Hope, we want to promote people in difficult circumstances to become change agents, to not become people who say, because of these experiences I went through as a child, and in my case, it would have been easy. I didn't go to school enough, not on time, so there's not much I can do. But I was able to look at all the experiences of my life and look at them as lessons. What did I learn from those experiences? I learned that food is very important, especially for women. And in my culture, a woman, regardless of what age, in any family, when there's not the mother and there's not the father, it is the girl child who's assuming the responsibility of putting food on the table. A lot of the challenges that a girl child is facing, like in my case, being married off when I was 10, is because food on the table. That offer was not made to my brother to marry someone when he was 10 so we can have food on the table. That offer was made to me. And so if I look back and think, if I was married when I was 10, I would not have been here today. Maybe I would have a house full of children, a husband that I don't even know how to live with or to communicate with because I was too young. And I wouldn't have gone through the journey of discovering myself to being this girl you see today. If you look at the journey of my life, I was a shy little girl. I didn't speak up. And at some point, I really even felt sorry for myself. That I was able to come out of that and come to where I am today started with me finding my liberation when I could put food on the table, when I could put money in my pocket, when I could choose how far do I want to go with which type of education, opening up that freedom to control my life, where nobody had to hold on to me until I get married. The way I got out of my uncle's, protective space was because the second time I had to leave the village when I was 12 to go and spend some time at the university learning some more, he couldn't come up with the same excuse he came up with before to say, what if she doesn't come back? He had to find some way of tying me to the village. And this is going to surprise you, but he said a different lady came to ask my permission to go and work at the university. And he said there, he says, well, if she goes, who is going to take care of her grandmother and her brother? And the grandmother we're talking about is his mother. So he made a condition that if I go, I had to pay him $2,500. At that time, I think every month I was getting between 50 and 75 US dollars a month. And I had to rent the space where I was living in. I had to pay my expenses for living. And I had to go and give something to my grandmother. And he was very explicit. If you want to buy maize meal or you want to buy food for your grandmother, you buy food for your grandmother. But this money that comes to me has to come as hard cash. So at the end of every month, I do my expenses. I go to the village to see my grandmother and to pay my uncle, which also explains how I ended up being at the university for 3 years, because it took me a long time to pay that amount of money. So that also delayed my return to school. But regardless of that, when the chance for me to go back to school came, I grabbed it and I went for it. But then with this $2,500, I bought my freedom. But that $2,500 did not appear out of thin air. And so as the Future of Hope, we're saying we want to provide that space where people can learn skills that provide immediately for these two things, food and some basic income. Because when you can control your food, when you can control your basic income, you can break out of most of the situations, especially those that are similar to what I went through. And this is how I wanted to model hope, to give people a chance to reflect on what they went through and to give them the means to get out of there and to start to imagine something different. If I had been still stuck in the same old cycle of working for my daily survival, I wouldn't have broken through to where I am today. And so hope for me is being able to give someone the tools that they need and to help them realize what they can contribute to the solution that they need in their situation, in the situation that their communities are in. That is hope for me.
Beautiful. How important it is to keep a hopeful approach to the world these days. One question I think is kind of related to what we are talking about is about assets and deficits. So this is a topic that we usually discuss during the academy, and the students, some of them might be familiar with it. So deficits or problems can be reframing to assets, right? So I want to know, what is your take on this? this is about identifying the positive aspects of our communities and working with them. Okay, so I want to know, like, what is your take on reframing situations from deficits to assets, and if we should look at the world through the eyes of assets or deficits?
I think deficits are something we have to acknowledge and to learn to understand and to understand them well, because deficits are highlighting the areas of need, are highlighting gaps that are desperately calling for some attention. And I think the experiences of my life, again, like I said, I could have chosen to become a victim of those experiences and sell that story of victimhood. I would still be doing that now. And you would see me and think, there goes that story again, but nothing has changed. It is a long process to turn deficits into assets. It is a process that requires commitment, but also a clear understanding of what it is that you're working for, that you're working against, and that which you want to work for. So I think sometimes we don't like to talk that much about deficits, but we should actually be paying them a lot of attention and put in the work to turn them into assets. It is very important to look at both. We look at the deficits and we look at the assets, but there is a way and there is a process to turn these into something. Just like my childhood experiences brought the future of hope today, which is focusing on trying to help other people to turn these deficits into something.
Beautiful. I want to bring up some questions from staff members and students. So we have a question from Doug Bosick. Can you please, can you please react and raise your hand, and so we can spotlight you? And so this question is related to climate change and food insecurity, but I will just let them ask the question to you. Perfect.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Chido, your story is amazing and it's really moved me. And I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing. I'm curious about, I have a question. My question is about the mushroom cultivation. And do you believe that there is do you believe it has it can have a real impact in sort of fighting climate change and reducing food insecurity?
Oh, yes, I do. I do because when I was little, I also tended to a field. And I remember watching the process of reduction in the yield every farming season. But also I remember having, at the end of each farming season, corn stalks, millet stalks, which I couldn't eat. And today, we calculate that for the staple food that we eat in Zimbabwe and all the grains that contribute to that, which is corn and millet and other small grains, only about 11% is actual food per hectare. And the bulk of what is in 1 hectare, which is 89% in this case, it's actually waste. And this waste can be converted into mushrooms. So in a very short space of time, we can take this waste and convert it into mushrooms. If we don't want to eat the mushrooms, there are markets bigger than ourselves that are willing to take the mushrooms and people can have money. But for us as a culture, I grew up going to forage for mushrooms with my grandmother, which I don't find anymore now. So this is mushroom farming for me, taps into something that is part of my culture, builds on something that is abundant right now in my community, and I think in many communities. Agro-industrial biomass is abundant and food is not. So mushroom farming can convert the biggest abundance in our world today into food in the form of the mushrooms. That's number one. But after the mushroom farming process, we have exposed this biomass to the biggest decomposer on the planet today, which is fungi. And that releases nutrients which can actually be used to rebuild soils. And today, one of the projects we are promoting as the Future Hope Foundation is a mushroom farming. We've made what we call the mushroom-based integrated food production system. It is how I have fed my foster children on a piece of land that is 1.5 hectares. That is where I have my home. That is where I have my mushroom farm. That's where I have my chickens, and that's where I fostered children. My land is fertilized with waste from mushroom farming, and I grow different kinds of things. I grow beans, I grow the maize, I have red and black maize. I am growing different kinds of legumes, and all fertilized with waste from mushroom farming, and in the combinations, of course, from also my chickens. When my mushroom farm fails, I have fertilizer for my soil. In that fertilizer for my soil, worms can grow, that can feed my chickens, but that also can continue to enrich the soil. So not only are we able to grow food thanks to mushroom farming, but we can also start a process of soil amelioration because our top soils are depleted. The life in the soil is eroded because of all these chemical and artificial things that we use. So I actually am a strong believer that mushroom farming can play an important role in rebuilding food systems, because in a controlled environment, you can farm mushrooms, but the outcome can feed the topsoils that we desperately need to rebuild at this stage in our development as a civilization.
Wow, thank you. That is really amazing and super inspiring. And I want to hear more about what you're doing and how I can get involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that awesome question. I'm trying to find some reaction that is like, but I can't find it, so I'm just gonna do that. It's really awesome, and I guess my hope will be that we all have the chance to get involved in a project like this at some point, because it's just fundamental for what the world needs as well. There's another question from a student called Arman. So if you can please raise your hand and we can spotlight you. Yeah, I will just like give it to you so you can ask the question directly to Chido.
So, hi Chido.
Hi.
I hope you're able to hear me.
I can hear you.
Yeah, so my question is, so like, first of all, I'm really inspired by your story because it reminds me of a time like adversity creates history and hope creates history. And I would like to add that what made the story of a rebel differ from that of a victim? What made it differ?
Can you ask again, please? I was not able to hear you clearly.
Yeah. So my question is, the story of a rebel, the story of yours, how did it differ from the story of a victim? A story of a self that would have happened, like in case if you would have married to someone 30 years senior to you.
I think what makes the big difference is that I was actively engaged in changing the story. I was able to see what was wrong with that story and to take the first step towards changing it. And asking for help. The group, getting the right kind of mentors. And I think when you have the right mindset, when you say, yes, this is what I'm going to do, and you take the first step, and then the right people will come to you. And it takes a lot of perseverance. You don't just take a step and then boof, everything happens to you. It takes continuing to take steps, even sometimes when nobody is stepping up to help you, you keep taking the steps. So, for example, not being scared of my uncle saying, well, you have to pay me I could have been, oh, how am I going to pay? I'm only getting $50, but I'm like, no way. With that $50, I am going to pay you, and I don't care if it takes me 3 years. I will spend those 3 years, I'll pay you, and I'll be free from you.
That was, I don't know words for it. Sincerely, like I'm so inspired by your story. Like the adversities you faced, the story you had, is just something that I can just post it in a picture frame and just keep it on my table.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Arman. Also, I wanna call David on the stage. He has a question related to the academia. So it would be great if you, David, can ask Chido your question.
Hi, Chido.
Hi.
It's really nice to meet you and to hear your story. I have so many questions. One of them, if the host will allow me, first one is around academia. I think that at the beginning of your session, you talked about how the information that you were learning at the university could be useful for regular people, right? It doesn't need to stay in this ivory tower of academia. So that really resonated with me, and I was wondering, how can we do more of that? And what sort of challenges did you face, if any, in making that connection between the academic world and then the work of average folks? If you could answer that, thanks.
So I think the major challenge is that for me to step in and to learn as an individual was easy. But the major challenge we're facing is how to take what we are learning now that we've gone on the ground, how to take that and connect it back to the system so that that loop continues. It is not just academia offloading to the ordinary folks, but it's also the ordinary folks. I'm part of the ordinary folks. What we're doing today, so for example, what we're doing fertilizing soils with mushrooms and growing different kinds of things is something that we want to be able to feed into the system. And I think that process of regular folks being able to feed into the system of academia is lacking. If you want to do that, it almost feels like you have to go in and study, or you have to take students for attachment. But we are looking now to find those connections that help us to stay connected, that there is a continuous exchange between academia and everyday life. And I think that integrating that process also into what academics are teaching, we want to be able to open up the everyday work that we're doing, which we feel is making a difference to students, for them to be able to learn ongoing, not just when they have to do a project and they have to narrow it down. And that for us would be something that we want to start working to address. While I'm here in Belgium, we're actually also starting to explore that. What can we do? So if you're thinking of what you can do, we would be happy to find a way we can collaborate and to share more of what we are doing, and then inspire some of the researches that are going to happen. And of course, we also want that when this research is put out there, it's also available in our languages, in a language that people can continue to interpret and to enrich, because we don't just want these things in the languages we understand, so we can just read them and think, oh, wow. We want them in the languages that we can read them and understand them, but be able to feed more into it. When I look at when I learned to farm mushrooms and what we are able to do today, it's something that I would like them to be able to continue. I want the student that I teach to be able to go on and say, I want to design a special machine that addresses this thing I was able to pick up from this research. And then build a really global awareness of these things that academics are working on, so they can be applied in real life. The more we can bring those things into real life, and ordinary folks feel that they can do something about it, the better for everybody and the better towards building sustainability.
Thank you so much for that. If you allow me to make a comment or another question, that first point, I think that idea of translating knowledge to other languages is so important. I think that for many of us in this call, we come from countries that were colonized by multiple, imperial powers, and that condition, what do we think is relevant and important knowledge and what's not, and also in which ways we learn about it. Mostly it's English, right? If something is published in Portuguese, it'll probably take a lot more time for us to learn about it. So I think that's really interesting. I guess I have another question more about like your own experience as someone from Zimbabwe, and how is that, people, what sort of like single stories have you had to like challenge as you have gone out to the world? You mentioned you went to Colombia, you're in Belgium. What sort of like ideas have you had to contest as you are now, maybe, I don't know if you call yourself an expert in farming or an expert in mushrooms, but like these notions that, oh, someone from the global South is coming and teaching me about this, right? Like, how does that work? How do you see that perspective? I think that's something that I'm very interested in. Just on a personal note, I'm an anthropologist and I am studying at a Latin American university. But part of my, plan is to use what I learned there, but like publish it in English, right? Because there's so much more that we need to learn from other places in the world that we don't know about. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Well, I think there's always a little bit, I can actually give a remark from the last week when I went to some meeting where they were referring to, they were talking about what is happening in the world today, what changes are coming and what we need to do about it. And somebody raises a question about Africa, say, oh, what about Africa? And like, oh yeah, we have to help them because if we don't help them, otherwise they're going to be on our doorstep. I'm like, hey, first of all, we are already on your doorstep. And secondly, we're not here only to help ourselves. We're helping you too. Because if you look at care work in the UK, care work in most parts, in some parts of Europe, there's no local people willing to provide that. It is us who's coming to provide that. And we don't come to provide that when you don't need it. You're not just sort of, oh, provide care work because that's the only thing you can do. It's because it needs to be done. So we're helping each other. And I think when I go into some of the areas where I've gone to teach, and as an African and as somebody who has gone to school the way I did, a gap here, a gap there, I think for me, the best way is to just engage from a perspective where you acknowledge we live in this world where these things exist, and you focus more on that which you want to grow more of. For me, I want people to be able to value us as Africans, what we bring, which may not be so big, but it is something. It has helped us to survive. It has helped us to build what we have today, regardless of our troubles. I think it's important that we meet on that same level. And that's my experience of being in and out of school and growing up in these circumstances have helped me really to navigate the both worlds and to meet the other with an understanding. And to also acknowledge, yes, sometimes you're confronted like that when they say, oh, we have to help Africa. I'm like, hey, I allow that to be, but at the same time, I make a point to say, as I go into the world further, I need to make this clear. And the best way of making things clear is to live through it, is to model, to be that change that you want to see. Sometimes it's not every time where you have to confront things as they come. Sometimes you see it and you say, okay, I see it. I acknowledge that this is happening, but the change, what would change look like towards this? How can I model that?
Thank you, Chido.
Thank you, David, for those awesome questions. That was great. I'm super inspired. Yeah, so we have one more question by a student. Kurt, can you please raise your hand? So we can like spotlight. Yeah, there you are. Awesome. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think Kurt will be able to express it better than me. So I'll just give it to you, Kurt.
Thank you so much. Good evening from the Philippines. Thank you so much, Chido, for having me. I'd like to ask, what is your view on the wide-scale media sensitization or romanticization of famine or poverty to attract humanitarian aid? So the context that I'm giving this question is that many, especially in the age of organizations of aid, we are predisposed to appeal to the short attention span of many people, especially those of a privileged background. So I have a follow-up question after that question, if that's okay too.
So I think you will find that when you go to our website, we're not so big on social media. And also, if you look at who we work with, we're working with people with whom we build a connection based not on the romanticized vision of what we're trying to do or an image that we're trying to sell. For me personally, I'm really against that romanticizing of things, or even an exaggeration that is just focused on getting support. I'm not for that. So because I've lived through there. And one of the reasons, actually, those who spoke with me in the very beginning when I said I want to stop going to school and to start working, I said, I want to be able to go back to the communities and they still can relate to me. They don't see some fancy girl who's coming to tell them, oh, this is how you can fix this, but they still see one of them. So I think it is wrong. Yes, it drives people to reach in their pockets, but I also think the same drive that also drive people to reach in their pockets and give money also in some way influences the drive with which those resources have to be used. And sometimes the impact is not what it must be, because then there was no this understanding that comes with, I mean, I can tell you today we work with Rotary. We've gotten our first and our second grant from Rotary for doing the Future of Hope. And what we've been able to do is to build a connection where they have an understanding of what we are trying to do. Not the story we're trying to sell, what we're trying to do. And as such, when they reach in their pockets, they reach with an understanding of exactly what we are wanting to do. And so if you look at the time that we get to implement the project, it is informed from the understanding of what change we're trying to bring. We're not just getting funds to buy a meal. A meal is good, but it's good when it's good. And it is good for as long as I'm able to get it. There needs to be more. So in our approach, we're not so big on this romanticizing things or overly exaggerating things. We always present our story as it is. The kind of change we're trying to do is a long, winding road. And we have given it our full commitment to work through it. We don't pretend that it is going to be just a snap of a finger and everything changes. There are things we've had to try and fail. And when we fail, we learn and we figure out how we try again better. So I am not for these overly fantasize pictures of what needs to happen in the world. I approach it with my feet on the ground. And as such, also as an organization, we try to approach everything with our feet on the ground, but also from a point of respect, where when we share stories of people we are trying to help, we try to do that with respect. We try to do that while maintaining their dignity, while respecting their struggle.
And if I may follow up on that, because I got a lot of insight on the role of those who are underserved, or those who have gone through adversity, to stand up for their stories and to write their own stories among people. I'm wondering, though, how about those who are on the receiving end of this? How about those who are on the privileged side, who do reach for their pockets once they see um, images of poverty and just donate right away? Do you think that there is something better that they can do to support a more agency, to support more agency and the wide aspects of things?
Ask that again. I did not quite get it clearly.
Yeah, I'm asking if what can people in a position of privilege do better in terms of catering to these initiatives. Yeah.
I think it all boils down to taking the time to understand what is the need and how to address the need sustainably. It is social media has this thing where, you know, and with all these specialized call to actions, do something today. And we are living in this world of the excitement of social media. So we do something, but we don't think of the long-term impacts of it. I think there are situations where there needs to be done something now. But then it's also important to say, yes, I've done something towards a situation that needed something to be done now, but what is the full life cycle of this something? How do I stop this for the longer term? So it's about really implanting that thinking of sustainability. The question of sustainability is not something that we should just look at from a point of, oh, how do we grow sustainable food, sustainable energy? But how do we solve problems in a sustainable way? How do we contribute to solving these urgent needs of people, these emergency situations? How do we contribute to that in a sustainable way? And if you're in a position of privilege, and let's say you can give money, make sure you make a demand that your money does this in a sustainable way. And sustainability takes time.
Thank you so much, Chido.
Thank you so much for those questions. I want to thank you for your time, Chido. I'm really inspired by your journey. It's been awesome to have you here. Some of the words that stay with me are patience, sustainability, working in community, leadership, the importance as well of relating to your community and the community needs, and working with respect and dignity. So thank you so much. I'm just really inspired by all your words and your journey. For the rest of the audience, I just want to announce that from now on, we will have a student-only space. So we ask that guests and staff members leave at this time. Thank you so much for joining us. And so I will just give a few seconds maybe for the transition. Thank you, Chido. It was awesome.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Chido.
Bye.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I want